What's up, friends, and welcome into Week 4 Rankings Wide Receiver Edition. I'm Chris Welsh, that is Pat Fitzmaurice, and Mick Ciallela. We are doing more ranks. We've got all the wide receiver questions and ranks, concerns, debates for you right here. We're going to be taking a look at the ECR over on FantasyPros, fantasypros.com/rankings, where you can check out all of our rankings at every single position. All the tough decisions are here for you. And I got the crew that we want, one of the best rankers, both of the best rankers out there in the land. So, gentlemen, let's jump into it. It's time for wide receiver ranks, starting with the top 12. CeeDee Lamb comes in at number 1. Justin Jefferson, Rashid Rice, Ja'Marr Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's your top 5. Marvin Harrison Jr., Nico Collins, Malik Nabers, Chris Godwin, Garrett Wilson, DK Metcalf, and a partridge in a pear tree, Brandon Aiyuk at 12. That's how we finish this bad boy out. As we usually don't look to spend a whole lot of time in that top 12 range, I do think there's a couple interesting questions, or sometimes you guys in your ranks will create a fun debate, like this first one. Malik Nabers. We know Malik Nabers is him. He's a guy that you're going to start in every circumstance out here, and that's not in question. He's ECR 8. Mick, you've got him at 11, but Pat, you've put him at 4. So the only reason I think to highlight this is let's talk about how excited you are to put him in that top spot, because I guess I'd have to be looking at your ranks right now. Lamb, Jefferson, Rashid Rice, Ja'Marr Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's the top 5 in ECR. You're kicking 2 of those guys to the curb, in theory, to put in Malik Nabers. So, Pat, hit us with the Malik Nabers love.
Let's reclassify Malik Nabers here, because I don't think there's any question he's going to be a first-round draft pick in 2025 fantasy drafts. Like, he is just that good. Malik Nabers is currently on pace, Welsh, for 130 catches, 1,535 yards, and 17 touchdowns. Fear of Daniel Jones is the reason why everyone is continuing to underestimate Nabers, but Nabers is so good that he defies Daniel Jones' badness. That's how good he is. Daniel Jones is averaging 5.8 yards per pass attempt right now. That's terrible. But aside from a fateful week 2 drop against the Commanders, where the Giants might have had a chance to win that game, had Malik Nabers been able to hang on to a pass he really should have been able to hang on to, good things are happening when Daniel Jones throws Malik Nabers the ball. The kid is just so good. His routes are absolutely filthy. He can make acrobatic catches, and he already might be like the best wide receiver in the NFL after the catch. Well, maybe Debo, but I mean, Malik Nabers, absolutely special after the catch. I do not want to be guilty of underranking this guy. He is just a fantastic player.
Well, you're not going to be at 4. You're definitely not going to be. Who are the 2 wide receivers that you have under him? Are you able to let us know?
Yeah, I just underneath Malik Nabers this week, I have Ja'Marr Chase and Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Oh, baby, Malik Nabers in that territory. Mick, you got him about ECR. What do you want to throw on him? I'm just shocker. Not going to have 17 touchdowns. Not going to probably have 1,500 yards and 130 catches. I love the pace numbers, but we're not going to be shocked when he has 100 catches, 1,200 plus yards, and has double-digit touchdowns. I think that's where the pace kind of comes back down. But you're about ECR level. He's a wide receiver 1. What do you want to add on Nabers?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing to say that hasn't been said. He's been terrific. I do have a bit of Daniel Jones bias, I suppose, but, Nabers has pushed through that, as Pat mentioned. The only thing I have an issue with as far as this matchup is I'm kind of torn, because I think the Cowboys are going to be ahead of this game, which means the Giants will be playing from behind, which has them, negative game script, which could help Nabers. But at the same time, Dallas has been so bad against the run that I wonder if the Giants at least try to impose their will on the ground, at least early on. So I'm just not sure the volume is going to be there as it has been in the last couple of weeks.
Keep that Malik Nabers comment, by the way, from Pat. Put a pin in that. And we're going to come back to that a little bit later, talking about quarterback proof. There's a wide receiver that's quarterback proof, because I think that's relevant to later in the show. Let's talk about Brandon Aiyuk. There's another really interesting one, because this is another favorable matchup. Last week everyone's like, hey, Brandon Aiyuk season, and it was Jauan Jennings season. Interestingly enough, both of these guys you're taking a look at, Jauan Jennings and Brandon Aiyuk, one of the top, or both in like the top 10 as far as like separation of wide receivers. Brandon Aiyuk has been a man coverage breaker, while Jauan Jennings has been one of the best zone separators. And they're going up against a Patriots team this week, which is top 10 in man coverage usage. So that does speak a little bit more to Brandon Aiyuk. But we've seen him be a little bit rusty. Brock Purdy, a little bit bad in some instances as far as throws go. But we've seen some drops, a lot of drops last week from Brandon Aiyuk. But I guess this really comes back to like seeing Jauan Jennings explode how he has. I think there are just some questions out there about what Brandon Aiyuk is going to end up looking like. He's ECR 10 because of the matchup. Mick, you've got him at 12. Pat, you've got him at 14. So, Mick, let's start with you here for a second. You are still wide receiver 1. Do you think this is going to be another Jauan Jennings big? I mean, I guess we're going to talk about him in a tiny bit here, so you could throw it in a little bit. But like, do you think Brandon Aiyuk is going to suffer at all from whatever Jauan Jennings could pop up here, and just kind of take a step back to the Brandon Aiyuk we've seen in the past against this matchup?
Not this week. As you mentioned, New England plays a lot of man coverage, and I think that means that Jauan Jennings is going to see a little bit more Marcus Jones. Marcus Jones has been arguably New England's top corner. I know they have Christian Gonzalez on the outside, who's probably going to contend with Aiyuk, but he's struggled a little bit too to start the season. So even though Aiyuk has not gotten it going as of yet, I still think Aiyuk is, a couple of tiers ahead of Jennings as far as this particular matchup goes.
Pat, we're going to talk about Jauan Jennings in a tiny bit, a little bit more in length. But Jennings is going to definitely have a little bit more coverage. What do you think about what I was saying? Like, Brandon Aiyuk, one of the better actual wide receiver separators against man coverage in the NFL. And we've seen like okay games. Do you think we are going to see that big breakout game finally 4 weeks into the season, kind of like his whole training camp just happened through the first 3 weeks of the season? Do you think that's going to happen?
I don't know if I want to go and predict that, Welsh, because Brandon Aiyuk did basically miss all of training camp. And we're kind of seeing that. Like, he has not been effective so far. I think we can count on the target count to be there for Brandon Aiyuk. After having 5 targets each of his first 2 games, no Deebo Samuel last week, he did have 10 targets against the Rams. It netted out to 48 yards. And that's his high watermark on the season. This is a guy who's still rounding into shape. And I just don't know if he's ready to be the alpha receiver you would expect him to be with Deebo Samuel out of the lineup. So having him at wide receiver 14, of course, you're going to start him. Maybe we get the breakout game this week, but I'm not wildly confident that we're going to get it. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw another pretty good Jauan Jennings game.
Pat, let me ask you this. Do you think there will be a time this year where you have Brandon Aiyuk ranked higher in a week than you have him right now? You kind of get what I'm saying? Like, you have him at 14. Do you think Brandon Aiyuk is going to crack the top 12 at some point, or do you think we might see a slow descent down the wide receiver ranks as the season goes on?
I was sort of behind consensus on him all offseason just because I worried about the target counts. With all the other pass catching firepower the 49ers had, of course, that was when Christian McCaffrey was thought to be healthy. George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, and none of those 3 players played last week, and Brandon Aiyuk still couldn't cash in on it. So Kittle might play this week, in which case I might move down both Aiyuk and Jauan Jennings a little bit. McCaffrey's eventually going to come back. So I don't know. I mean, this is where Brandon Aiyuk should be making hay for the people who drafted him, and it hasn't happened yet. So I'm a little nervous.
I think we all are a little bit nervous. You don't have to be nervous with our friends, though, over at Game Time. Game Time is the #1 choice for ticket buying. It's the easiest out there with the most transparency. Whether you want to go hit a Niner game, Cardinal game, Packer game, football, baseball, guess what? Baseball season's coming to a close. I'm going to the season finale, Diamondbacks and Padres out here in Arizona, and I would only use Game Time. Game Time also has this new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Game Time ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry and the lowest price guarantee. Or Game Time, they'll credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account and use code FANTASYPROS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code FANTASYPROS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Let's get to wide receivers 13 through 24. A little bit more of a fun area. Chris Olave comes in at 13 after a nice bounce back week last week. Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, Zay Flowers, Amari Cooper, DJ Moore down at 18. Drake London, Jayden Reed, Tyreek Hill, 21. Deontay Johnson, Jameson Williams, and George Pickens that rounds out top 24. Gentlemen, remember that pen that we put in? Let's pop it out here for a second. You said Malik Nabers was a quarterback-proof wide receiver, and I do think there are wide receivers that have that are quarterback-proof. Why is Tyreek Hill not quarterback-proof? That was a big debate that Andrew Erickson and we actually didn't debate. We joined together in the buy, sell, and trade episode, and I could be wrong. He could be wrong. We could be wrong. I believe Tyreek Hill has proven to be a quarterback-proof wide receiver. Not every single week. I think the offense has to adjust here. So this is one I get while not getting. Tyreek Hill is ECR 21. Mick, you've got him down at 24. Fitz, you've got him at 21. Tyler Huntley is coming back. They have had to adjust this offense. And the only way you're going to win games in Miami is getting the ball in Tyreek Hill's hands. As I said in that episode, 2 straight years of 1,700 yards. He scored 44 touchdowns over the last 4 years. You're not going to win games by not getting the ball. Doesn't matter if Dan Marino was back in at quarterback for the Dolphins. So, Fitz, you are a tiny bit higher, but he is outside the top 20 for you. So, what makes Tyreek Hill not quarterback proof?
So Daniel Jones might be a below average starting quarterback, but he is still relatively functional. Miami is looking at Canadian Football League caliber quarterbacking, unfortunately, with apologies to our Canadian friends. No one likes a good Montreal Alouettes, Winnipeg Blue Bombers game more than I do. But Tim Boyle, maybe we see Tyler Huntley here after having less than 2 weeks to process a new offensive system and playbook. I'm just throwing up my hands here, Welsh. Like, I was guilty of overranking Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle in week 3. I just thought I maybe overestimated Mike McDaniel's ability to scheme up easy touches, especially for Tyreek, who just with his lethal big play speed, all he needs to do is catch a little slant and he can take it to the house. And maybe it happens once or twice in any given game. But so the ceiling remains here for Tyreek Hill, but the floor is just not safe anymore with the quality of quarterbacking he's getting. And the concern is that it's just as bad in week 4 as it was in week 3.
Yeah, and I think all of it is reasonable, by the way. Like, and that was the funny thing, too, in me saying I want to buy Tyreek Hill. I wish there was a lot of these great underlying things that could tell this story. To be fair, last week, he had a low, he had like 6.8 ADOT. That's not good. He had a 15% target share. That's really not good. Those are not good things. His catch rate has been low. But maybe an optimist here. If Mike McDaniel wants to win games, you have to get the ball in his hand. That's what I just keep saying. And that is done by, what did you just say? Screen passes, short slants. Let him make the big plays, because if Tua was out here, you would still be ranking him as top 5. So that's kind of my thing with him. It's not like the talent went away from Tyreek Hill. It's just a quarterback play. So you can fix it. The Packers did that with Malik Willis, who also was new to the team and found, and not that everybody was awesome or anything like that, but you've got this explosive running back. So I guess I feel a little bit like defensive in that, like, I just want to buy him, but there is kind of a prove that you know how to throw the ball now with these suboptimal quarterbacks. So Mick, I'm taking a lot of this here, but please, hit it here, because you've got him, I think, you've got him right outside of ECR. He's still a wide receiver 2 for you, but where do you stand on this entire thing of like buying on him, being done, wait to see if they can fix it with Tyreek Hill? Because there's a lot of people that are terrified about Hill right now.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think you probably are going to start him at the end of the day, but I do think there is cause for concern. You mentioned the ADOT. The week 1, he had 143 air yards, I believe it was. And then week 2, it was about 79. And then week 3, it was in the 30s. So they need to prove that they can get the ball to him down the field. And as Fitz mentioned, obviously it'd be smart to throw some screen passes or small, short slants and things of that nature. But I kind of need to see them do that. I know they've done it in the past, but they had the threat of Achane and Mostert and the threat of Waddle on the other side with Tua, behind center. So I think that defenses are kind of keying in on Hill now, and it's going to be a little more difficult to scheme those open throws. So I think at the end of the day, you're going to start him, but I'm tempering expectations until I see him prove otherwise.
And if you out there, the user, has great options, good for you. Like, good on you if you have, like, if you're like, hey guys, I got, whatever it is. I got Brandon Aiyuk, Malik Nabers. I also got Amari Cooper and Tyreek Hill. Should I sit? Like, okay, then now maybe you have some options. But I'm not sure everybody is put in there. So getting like too cute about it, being like, well, I'm going to put in T. Higgins over him. I think the upside is still there. But an interesting aspect of this is a guy that ranks one spot higher than him is Jayden Reed, ECR 20. Mick, you are at 21. Pat, you are the low man, though. So you are not co-signing Jayden Reed over Tyreek Hill. You've got Reed down at 28. Is the 28, Pat, a little bit about the question mark of Jordan Love playing, Malik Willis being the quarterback, or is that just a standard rank even when Jordan Love is back?
I'm working under the assumption Love is going to be back for this big divisional game against the Vikings, but I'm a little worried about the matchup, quite honestly. The Vikings defense has been terrific. They've held their first three opponents to 30 points, put the clamps on C.J. Stroud in a very dangerous Houston passing game last week. Defensive coordinator Brian Flores has just done a phenomenal job throwing all sorts of pressure and unexpected, unpredictable pressure. You never know who is coming on the pass rush when you're playing the Vikings. And we've got Jordan Love, who's going to be operating on a sprained MCL. If in fact he plays, maybe they're going to want to run the ball significantly because their running game has been working really well so far. And I think they want to keep that pressure off of Love. Plus, the Packers have a lot of different contributors in the passing game. Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Tucker Kraft, Dontavian Wicks. I feel more comfortable ranking Reed as a wide receiver 3 than as a wide receiver 2.
Mick, you got him at 21, so you're right around ECR. The interesting thing with this game is potential shootout type of stuff. I mean, the Vikings have just been absolutely phenomenal on offense, and if the Packers are going to keep foot with them and Jordan Love is there, he spreads the ball out a little bit more. That actually is it's a much better spot for Jayden Reed, because if you've got the defense spread out, they love to do end arounds. They love to play that small Debo roll, screen passes, and let him do stuff after the catch. Is that what this is kind of about? I mean, do you think like the offensive nature of this game is going to be a big benefit for Jayden Reed? Maybe we see more of week 1 Jayden Reed here?
I think so. And actually, I actually thought I had him too low because I actually love this matchup for him. So Minnesota has been good defensively as a whole, but I think they kind of play into Reed's strength. They play a lot of zone coverage. Reed is a zone beater. He's had 9 targets against zone coverage this year. He's had 8 catches for 191 yards and a touchdown on those 9 targets. We saw Stephon Diggs catch 10 passes against them last week. Granted, there were some game script issues that helped that along. But I think the zone coverage that Minnesota plays is going to lend itself towards a bigger Jayden Reed game, assuming that Jordan Love is under center on Sunday.
Let's talk about a wide receiver that, outside of touchdown equity, it's kind of been an underperforming, if you will, in his offense. And that's Mike Evans. Mike Evans is given a very generous ECR 14 this week. Mick, you are lower down at 17. Pat, you are above. I was expecting some big breakout plays, but it's been Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin has been the guy that has really racked up volume where we haven't seen that with Mike Evans. Mick, let's hear it. You have him at 17. You're lower than consensus. Talk to us about Mike Evans. Are we going to get that big? I roughly say big breakout game. Got 2 touchdowns in week 1. Like, that was great. But like, are we going to get a big volume game coming here in the near future, especially off of a Bucs really, really disappointing, underperforming week 3?
Yeah, that's the concern for me, is he only has an 18.3% target share through 3 weeks. We've seen a lot of Chris Godwin. I'm not sure how this matchup is going to lend itself towards more volume. Philadelphia is kind of in the middle of pack as far as playing man versus zone. I would prefer Evans versus man and Godwin versus zone. We talk about different receivers and their skill sets. So as far as that goes, I think it's kind of negligible as far as the zone versus man. So I think that Evans is going to be, I think a little bit of uptick in volume is to be expected, but I just don't know if we're going to see, that huge game where he has 10, 11, 12 targets.
Pat, you got him at 11, so you were over consensus. Wide receiver 1. Godwin has kind of played that role. If I remember correctly, I could be misspeaking, but I think Godwin has outperformed Evans in 2 of the 3 weeks, if that sounds right. So where's what level of optimism is sitting out there that we're going to get back to that volume with Evans?
Pretty high. Only 5 catches for 59 yards for Evans the last 2 weeks. Really tough individual matchup against Patrick Surtain Jr. on the Broncos last week. But Buccaneers play caller Liam Cohen has specifically talked about how they need to get the ball back in Evans' hands. And whereas it was a tough matchup against Surtain and the Broncos last week, not as tough a matchup this week against the Eagles. There's really no one in that secondary I think can just shut down Mike Evans. So I kind of think the big game is coming.
All right, the final one in this territory. How about Jameson Williams, ECR 23? Mick, you got him at 26. Pat, you got him right at 24. Disappointing last week. The big thing, Pat, that stood out to me is I thought through 2 weeks we were over those outings that he just had in week 3, because that was Jameson Williams' thing in the past. Number one thing was like he'd be 3 catches for 112 yards and 2 touchdowns and then nothing. But also it was those nothings. And I thought we were beyond that we would no longer get these 1s or 0s from Jameson Williams, and the floor would be 4 for 45 or something like that. And that's what had leveled him up so much, because we saw such massive target share uptick for him, a little bit at the expense of Sam Laporta, but then we did get that. And I suppose we do kind of get that in general from wide receivers, but that's always been my biggest worry with Williams, is that disappearing act. And it kind of came back in our face. You've got him about at ECR. You guys still have him at wide receiver 2. But what is your level of fear that week 1 and 2 Jameson Williams isn't as much reality as maybe some of us were hoping?
That trapdoor floor is always going to be in play with Jameson Williams in any given week, when the other weapons in the passing game are Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's capable of having 15, 16, 17 target games, and Sam Laporta, who hasn't even gotten going yet. And then there's the fact that sometimes the Lions and Dan Campbell are just going to want to get back to basics and run the ball. And they did that in a good running game matchup against the Cardinals last week. So that was part of the reason we saw Jameson have 1 catch for 9 yards on 3 targets. I will tick him up in the rankings if Sam Laporta doesn't play. He was carted off at one point last week. He did come back. I think he left again and came back again. So I'm not sure what his status is yet for week 4, but not a great matchup. Seahawks have 2 really good cornerbacks in Tyreek Woolen and Devon Witherspoon. Still a top 25 guy for me, but Mick's ranking of wide receiver 26 might be better here. If anything, I kind of want to move him down, even if Sam Laporta is out possibly.
No, so that's interesting, because I do think the matchup isn't great, but that was like a thing I kept looking at that had me a little bit worried. When I saw these like really high target shares for Jameson Williams, it contrasted with low target shares for Sam Laporta. And then openly the coaches were talking, we got to get Sam Laporta the ball. So if Laporta's out, though, to me, that is like, oh, there's just less equity that's going to go to another person. We can get back to that. So I would see that as a positive. But this matchup in general doesn't feel great, Mick. So it's really the same questions on that floor ceiling concern with Jameson Williams from a week to week perspective, but specifically this week against Seattle.
Yeah, I think the matchup is very difficult. So Seattle is only allowing 4.84 yards per target to opposing receivers and 8.46 yards per catch. And we know Jameson Williams is the guy who likes to catch the ball down the field. So Seattle is not allowing much in the way of deep passing at all. So I think this is going to be a matchup that is going to be tough for Jameson's skill set.
All right, let's jump over to wide receivers 25 through 36. These are our wide receiver 3s. Coming in at 25, Stephon Diggs. We've got Terry McLaurin at 26, T. Higgins, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Brian Thomas, Tank Dell at 30, Jauan Jennings at 31, Rashid Shaheed, Christian Kirk, Rome Odunze, Xavier Worthy, and Calvin Ridley. Let's start with that Jauan Jennings, ECR 31. Mick, you've got him at 27. Fitzy baby. 18. Let's go. That is I think I have him at the exact same number. It might be 19 for Jauan Jennings. I do not believe he is going to take over as the number one wide receiver. But with Debo out, again, I say this again, they throw the number one first read in San Francisco is to the Debo position. It was almost 30%. And that is Jauan Jennings. Great separator. Brandon Aiyuk gets a lot of the coverage. Kittle in or out, it doesn't really matter. He's not going to have 175 and 3 touchdowns. But I love this Jauan Jennings play because it's a porous defense. They are going to throw the ball. And Jennings clearly shows his level of separation and the good I think he's just a chalky top 24 receiver. Maybe we'll eat our words. But Pat, you lay it out for us. You got him at 18. That is a very solid, aggressive ranking.
You make a great point about the first read thing, Welsh. Like, I don't know off the top of my head what the first read share was for Jauan Jennings last week, but it seemed like watching that game, Brock Purdy was looking for him quite often as his first read. And so, yeah, this gets back to Brandon Aiyuk having missed training camp and maybe not being ready to assume this massive alpha receiver target hog role. The 49ers sort of showed us what they think of Jauan Jennings in the offseason. They gave him a 2-year contract extension worth, I think, more than $15 million with like $8 million plus in guaranteed money.
He was a restricted free agent. They did not let him even sign an offer sheet. That was the thing that they had signed him to with that.
So clearly they feel he is a guy they can count on to step up when needed, and he is needed right now. So again, I'm going to be lower than this if we know for sure that George Kittle is going to play. I'll probably back him out of the top 20, but I would still feel pretty confident starting Jauan Jennings this week against the Patriots. The only thing you worry about is that maybe they get to take their foot off the gas pedal a little bit late in the game. But, you know, you have to figure if they do have a big lead that Jauan Jennings is going to be part of the fun in building that big lead.
And to your point, I would worry that the Niners would want to keep the ball on the ground and have time of possession controlled. And if they can run against the Patriots with Jordan Mason, it's 25 plus carries. And, they just kind of keep rolling with that. That could take out the equity. Mick, you are not as optimistic as we are. You are lower than consensus. You've got him at 31. Well, actually, you know what? It's funny. Actually, he moved down to 31. No. I'm sorry. I'm completely mixing it up. You have him at 27, 31. Sorry. You do not hate Jauan Jennings. You love him. You've got him as a wide receiver 3, but you're not in the same optimism as Pat and I.
I'm not joining the love fest that you guys are on with him, but I do like him. I just think the matchup is a little bit geared more towards Aiyuk and particularly Mason. As I have Mason as my top running back. Jennings, I think, is going to be more of a zone coverage type receiver, as we've discussed before, and the Patriots are going to play a lot of man. So with Marcus Jones manning the slot. So I think that Jennings is going to have a little bit struggle in that matchup, which is why I have him more in the wide receiver 3 range.
Jaxon Smith-Njigba, ECR 27. You guys are both lower, 31 and 34. So Mick, break it down here. You've got him at 31. He did not have the big breakout game coming off of the big breakout game in week 2, kind of tapered back a little bit. You mentioned in an earlier episode that we had done together on the RB ranks that you were digging the Tyler Lockett maybe playing and getting some more usage. So what are your thoughts on Jaxon Smith-Njigba?
I think he's, a solid wide receiver 3, but I do prefer Metcalf and Lockett in this particular matchup. This is another team that likes to play a lot of man coverage. And we've seen, in Smith-Njigba playing in the slot, which is where he should get Robertson in coverage. Robertson has been by far the best cornerback that Detroit has. Terrion Arnold has struggled. Carlton Davis has really struggled. So I think that Seattle is going to attack those two matchups more often with Metcalf and Lockett. Don't really have anything against Smith-Njigba in this matchup, but I just think this is going to be more of a matchup for Metcalf and Lockett to eat.
So this would be an interesting debate here. You have got him at 31, and the next receiver, Rashid Shaheed, at 34. Pat, you've got Jaxon Smith-Njigba at 31 and Rashid Shaheed at 30. So you're a little bit higher. I wanted to kind of do a level of trust with Rashid Shaheed, but Pat, could you speak on Shaheed versus Jaxon Smith-Njigba? Because I will say the benefit to Shaheed was he still had some big targets. He just dropped a couple huge plays, which he could have the much bigger stat line. JSN kind of feels like he's a little bit more of a floor, and we saw what that upside was with him, by the way, 16 targets or whatever it was. So what's got you Shaheed over JSN after that big donut?
If I were making that lineup decision, I would play Rashid Shaheed over Jaxon Smith-Njigba. We've been on the target roller coaster with JSN. 2 in week 1, 16 in week 2, 3 in week 3. I guess maybe the one point for optimism with the JSN matchup this week is that the Lions are kind of a pass funnel defense. Like, they're really tough against the run, much easier to throw on, especially if they're missing Brian Branch this week. I haven't seen his status, but I think he and Trey McBride both might have gotten concussions when they cracked heads last week. Shaheed, as you mentioned, Welsh, like, he did have a chance at a 1 or 2 big plays, including one where a defender got there just in time to break up what would have maybe been a long touchdown catch. 3 catches, 73 yards and a touchdown for Shaheed in week 1, 4 catches, 96 and 2 TDs in week 2, and then a donut last week on 5 targets. So I'm not fundamentally changing my stance on Shaheed off a bad game. Like, he is still a very dangerous big play threat on a team which basically has 2 viable wide receivers and not a lot of pass catching firepower at tight end. So even though I think we saw that the Saints are not going to have one of the very top passing games in the league, as we might have thought based on the first 2 weeks, still, I like Shaheed's role in this offense.
Let's talk about another wide receiver here in Odunze, who had his big breakout game. Caleb loves him. He's the big play target. It's weird because you sometimes worry about like what Keenan Allen can be when he comes back, but Cole Kmet and him kind of seem like they might be sharing some of those targets. Odunze absolutely 8, and we haven't seen DJ Moore really get deep. ECR 33. Mick, you've got him at 38. Pat, you've got him at 32. Mick, where are you on Odunze's consistency? You do not have him as a wide receiver 3. So are you worried the advent of Keenan Allen, maybe that was a one-off game? Do you not think that Odunze is going to be a week in and week out big play target for the Bears?
I think he can be a big play target, but I do not think he's going to be a consistent contributor as far as fantasy goes. I think the issue for me more with last week's game was Caleb Williams threw the ball 52 times, I believe. I don't think the Bears want to do that. Now, there are certain games where they may not have a choice, but I do think that for the most part, the volume is going to go down as the passing volume in general goes down. So I think that inconsistency has him a little bit lower than guys like, Jameson Williams and Shaheed for me.
Pat, same thing. Odunze. I feel like this was a buy type of candidate right now. I think he's trending in a really great direction, is going to continue getting those targets. But where's the level of like absolute consistency? You do worry you're going to get those donuts. Like Keon Coleman has been really frustrating, and all the snap percentage, no targets. And then last week, didn't play the first 2 series. Brian Thomas, because the Jags have really struggled. Like some of these rookie receivers, there's some massive talent out there, but we aren't just getting the big play. Odunze was kind of the same thing, and some people not wanting to put Odunze in the same neighborhood as like Harrison and Nabers, but we saw what that big play looks like. And we got to be frank, Caleb Williams loves him. Caleb Williams is going to target him in the red zone, and that might be a continuing factor. But what level of consistency do you think we can get out of the rookie, especially for people wanting to start him as a wide receiver 3 week in and week out?
We might have to worry about the consistency just because of how this passing game has looked so far. At times has looked pretty awful. And maybe last week it was a lot of garbage time production, let's face it, for Caleb Williams in the falling far behind early on and getting this catch-up game script. But yeah, you mentioned it, Welsh, the chemistry, and we saw the rapport building if you watched Hard Knocks between Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze. And Rome Odunze is a worthy member of the Big 3, the so-called Big 3 in this rookie class with Malik Nabers and Marvin Harrison Jr. Like Odunze is close to their level as far as talent goes. Like he is going to be a star. So if Keenan Allen is out this week, I think Rome Odunze is very playable. But if Keenan Allen is back, becomes a little less playable and more like a flex-worthy guy in deeper leagues.
So he'll be out of your 36 if Allen is active?
Probably, yes.
I wonder if he can beat that. That'll be actually, I want Keenan Allen to get out there because I feel like Odunze can keep his value when Allen is out there. And I think that's what we need to be proved. Let's do a price check on Khalil Shakir, ECR 38, Mick at 39, Pat 27. We are in as the number one wide receiver. Pat, they used a bunch of different dudes. Keon Coleman showing up late to practices, apparently. He ended up only getting one target. It was that touchdown. There's one constant in that receiving game, and it has been Khalil Shakir, and you are in as a top 30 on him.
Yeah, he's only got 14 targets, so not a giant target count for Khalil Shakir, but that's twice as many as any other receiver in the Bills' offense. He is the number one target for Josh Allen, one of the best quarterbacks in the game. And one reason the target count is low, two of the Bills' 3 wins have been absolute blowouts where they just got to take the air out of the ball. And by the way, Khalil Shakir has caught all 14 of those targets. Like, he was hyper efficient last year and has been hyper efficient again so far this year with 168 yards and 2 touchdowns. Shakir's currently the wide receiver 17 in half-point PPR scoring, and I think he's done that with maybe artificially low target counts. If we start to get a solid 8 targets a game from Shakir every week, look out. Like, he's going to be maybe challenging for consistent wide receiver 2 status.
And guess what? When I asked the question, who's your favorite outside the top 36 wide receiver? Bam, there you go. That's Pat's Khalil Shakir. So, Mick, you can absolutely speak on Shakir, but we know he's not going to be your favorite wide receiver outside the top 36. But who is?
Calvin Ridley is at the moment, but I definitely would not argue against Shakir or Pat's argument. I like Shakir a lot. I just think that this particular week is going to be more of a Ridley week against Miami. I think that Miami has struggled a lot in coverage as far as, opposing wide receiver production. And I think that it's going to be a little bit dicey because I'm not sure if the volume is going to be there. I think he only had 3 targets last week, but I do think he can get behind them for a deep ball. So I kind of like Ridley this week.
You guys want more ranks? Go to fantasypros.com/rankings. You can check out all the positional ranks from over 100 experts. They're updating every single day, so stay up to the minute with it with our rankings over at fantasypros.com/rankings. That puts wide receiver ranks in the books for week 4.